Hey everybody, this is Jesse Weber and welcome to Law and Crime Now. We're going to start with huge developments out of Idaho. Chad Daybell, the current husband of Lori Vallow Daybell, has been charged with with two different crimes right now. And we're going to be talking about the crimes of destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence, which is what he faces. Lori Vallow herself has been charged in connection with the disappearance of her kids, JJ and Tylee, who have been missing since September. Now, how does this come about? Because we learned that there were two sets of human remains found on Chad Daybell's property. And although the identities have not been released at this point, the autopsies are pending. We heard an interview from the Rexburg mayor who says that he believes the remains are of the kids, and the kids' grandmother just said that she believes at least one pair of remains is that of JJ. So there is a lot to talk about, including today was Chad Daybell's first court appearance. The bail was set at $1 million. Preliminary hearing has been scheduled for July 1st through July 2nd, where I imagine we will learn more evidence. But let's begin at this first court appearance, where we heard from prosecutor Rob Wood, who told us additional details. Take a look.
Lastly, the court has issued the arrest warrant. The court designated that it would address bond and or bail at the hearing set today. And so I'd like to hear argument from both parties regarding bail. So why don't I hear from the state first, and then I'll hear from the defense.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state is requesting that bail be set at $1 million. While we recognize that felony concealing of evidence only has a maximum sentence of 5 years per charge, I think the background and context of this case necessitates a higher bail. One of the primary reasons we are asking that bail be set in that amount is that the evidence that has been concealed in this case, it's not simply a document, drugs, a gun. These are human remains. And we can, although those remains have not yet been positively identified, we are aware that those remains are the remains of children, which we believe is an aggravating factor. We have asked that the probable cause affidavit be sealed, but I would ask the court to take note of paragraphs 39 and 40 and the manner of the concealment of one of those bodies, which the state finds to be particularly egregious, both an aggravating factor and bears on character, as Rule 40 as Rule 46 allows us to look at. Your Honor, we understand that the possible sentence on this case is not that long, but knowing what the subject matter is, we find it extremely serious. And we would also note that because of what has been found on Mr. Daybell's property, should he bail out, he has strong incentive to flee. Clearly, this is the beginning now of an investigation into the deaths of children who are found on his property. And so that provides a strong incentive to flee, and we would ask that the bail reflect that. Whatever the court sets as bail, we would ask that the conditions be set that should he bond out, that he be required to wear an ankle monitor, and that his movement be restricted to Madison and Fremont counties.
The remains are that of children. That's the first time we heard that in an official capacity. Let's bring in some guests right now. Joining me is Law and Crime's own Terry Austin. I also have with me forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan, who's been following this case. But right now, our executive trial producer, Cathy Russon, is in Idaho on the scene. Cathy, thanks for joining us. What are you learning on your end?
Well, interesting that the two sets of remains were found. But I'll tell you what struck me probably the most in that hearing is when the prosecutor said, he was talking about aggravating factors, that one of the children was concealed in an especially egregious way. What does that mean? You know, one of the kids was more horrific than the other, apparently, the way that they were being concealed. I have been out to the property. The police have it barricaded. You can't get quite to the property yet, but I will be able to get there this evening. They're going to take those barricades down. I'm telling you, It's a really sad day. I don't think it's a shock to anyone, but maybe a little bit of a shock that they were buried on his property.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, Joseph. Over to you. I gotta say, it's kind of surprising, is it not? We had talked on this show before about where could they be buried, and again, these are not been positively identified as the kids. But if in fact they are, does this surprise you? We had talked about conversations about Yellowstone, but on Chad Daybell's property, what does that tell you?
Yeah, and it's not just that, we had these flights of fancy about Yellowstone, and rightly so. That's where Tylee was last seen. But let me kind of, clue you into something here that just absolutely struck me. And that's the fact that if you look very closely at the aerial photographs, where they are exhuming these remains is immediately adjacent. You can see it in the top right portion there. It looks like a fire pit with logs around it. And Jesse, these remains that you see there, where the backhoe is, and they're excavating that area, these remains are not off in a tree-lined area. They're not off in the wilderness somewhere. My God, these bodies are literally buried right out in the middle of this field. And this is not some far-flung area. There are roads that pass immediately adjacent to this property. You can see them in some of the images. And it is striking. There's the main road. You can see the ambulance there. Anybody that was driving by at that particular time could have just noticed something, and that's what's so shocking to me about all of this. And I think another piece to this, they've already searched the property once. To what extent was it searched? Was it only the dwelling, or did they get out into the fields and search at that point in time? So this whole thing has got me really.
You know what? I'm just going to follow up with you, Joseph. Terry, I want to get to you in a minute about the legal aspect, but Joseph, while I have you, the location of the bodies. This is some time since we've last seen them. Are you concerned that given where these bodies are found, we may not know all the details we may need to know in terms of cause of death or what happened? Walk us through that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. These remains that they have right now, we don't know who they are at this point, but the remains that they have right now, keep in mind, if they marry up with the timeline that we have with JJ and Tylee, we have to think about this. This has been months and months and months ago. These children, assuming that they are buried in bare earth, have been subjected to all manner of environmental impact. And so it's going to be very difficult, Jesse, to pin this down.
Yeah, and I want to get into what we can expect from the autopsy. But Cathy, let me just turn it back to you. It's my understanding you have been speaking with some of the locals in the area. Is that correct?
Yes, I have. I spoke to a lady today that lives directly across the street from the courthouse here. And the reason it caught my attention is on her chain link fence in front of her house, they have made posters, her and her children, in support of JJ and Tylee. And I spoke to her, and let's take a look at that.
At first, it was just like, it was sad knowing that 2 kids had gone missing. And then as the case developed, it was just like, this is insane. And yesterday, as the news came out about Chad being taken into custody and finding remains on the property, that was hard. And it was kind of happy that Chad's taken into custody, but it's hard because you don't know. I mean, I don't know if they've confirmed what those remains are, but you can only speculate. And in a way, it's if they are the children, it's, I guess, in a way, closure to find out what happened. But sad to know that what happened to them wasn't right at all.
Cathy, it's one thing to get the perspective of anybody from across the country, but people who are right there, that's fascinating.
Yeah, Ashley, she went on in that interview, and we can put the whole thing up on our YouTube page later, really angry and emotional as a mother herself. And she said, this isn't what mothers do. This isn't what parents do to their children. And she also has an autistic child. And so she has just been riveted with this case. It's been very upsetting, but she's just one of thousands and thousands of people, average everyday citizens that are really invested in this case.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Terry, let's get to some legal aspects here, because the million-dollar question, the question that we do not have at this point, that's why I'm going to you, Terry, because you know everything. The question is, what led authorities to Chad Daybell's residence? What was the evidence they had, the probable cause to have that warrant? Because, like Joseph said, they searched it once. What do you think it was?
You know, I wish I had the definitive answer to that. I can speculate as to what I think probably the answer is, I think they took evidence when they went the first time from the house, and that ultimately led them to search the property in more detail. Maybe they found a note, maybe they found a shovel. I also think that there might have been some conversations in jail. Remember, Lori Vallow is in jail. Maybe she had some conversations with some of her inmates that she's sharing the prison with, and she could have said something. So I think there are multiple factors at
let's
play
talk
here.
about that, Terry. The scenario you just laid out is that she didn't deliberately turn on Chad. Is there the possibility that she did turn on Chad? Because one of the theories could be, and I'm just speculating here, but couldn't she have, we don't know what happened to the kids yet. We don't know who these bodies are. We don't know the cause of death. But is it not possible that she was involved and buried the bodies on his property? I mean, that is a theory that keeps coming up as we've learned this. And there's a lot of different theories. But could it be that she's turning on him? Because right now he's not charged with murder.
Well, that's right, Jesse. And whoever flips first is going to get the better deal from this whole situation. I do think that because both of them were hiding information, they both denied that knowing anything about where the children were. I think they were both involved in killing the children. If in fact we find out that these remains are the remains of JJ and Tylee. So, you know, she might be saying, look, I know where the bodies are, and it was all Chad.
Yeah, well, let's talk. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk more about what additional charges there could be, because at this point, he is accused of hiding bodies because he had a feeling they were going to be discovered. Let's take a break. When we come back, more of these updates in Idaho. And welcome back, everybody. We're still talking about Chad Daybell, who has been arrested and charged with evidence concealment, evidence destruction charges because these two sets of human remains were found on his property. Today was his initial court appearance. Judge had a big decision here, what to set the bail at. The prosecution said $1 million. You heard the defense say that's totally wrong. It should be somewhere towards the range of 200, 250. What did the judge decide? Let's take a listen.
The court has listened carefully to the argument of both parties. The court has reviewed Idaho Criminal Rule 46, specifically the factors contained in Idaho Criminal Rule 46 under subsection C. There are 10 different factors that the court has looked at. The court has also looked carefully at Idaho Code 192904 and the factors that are designed therein. In looking at the factors in 192904, there are four specifically that the legislators have set forth. Number one, ensuring the appearance of the defendant. Number two, ensuring the integrity of the court process, including the right of the defendant to bail as constitutionally provided. Ensuring the protection of victims and witnesses. And number four, ensuring public safety. The court is cognizant that there is an absolute constitutional right to bail provided in both the Idaho Constitution and the U.S. Constitution. The court has taken all of those factors into account, and based upon those factors and the charge, the court is going to set bail in the amount of $1 million. The court notes that the charge is destruction, alteration, and concealment of evidence as pertained in the criminal complaint. I've taken all those factors into account, specifically the factor in Rule 46C, subsection 6, which designates I'm to take into account the nature of the current charge and any mitigating or aggravating factors that may bear on the likelihood of conviction and the possible penalty. The underlying charge here is destruction, alteration, and concealment of evidence, and the allegation is that the evidence was human remains of two different people.
Bail set at $1 million. Joseph, let's go back because I still want to focus on what's happening right now. Autopsies have to be performed. When could we get results? Walk us through this process of what's happening right now.
Well, a lot of that is going to be dependent upon the condition of the remains. I suspect that we're not going to have what's referred to as a lot of soft tissue left. that is there is going to be greatly degraded. So we're going to be heavily reliant upon the skeletal remains, unless these bodies had been held in another location, maybe in a frozen area and then buried later. But just judging from the earth around there, Jesse, and again, this is a bird's eye view looking down. It looks like there's a growth of vegetation around that area. Like they may have been there some time. Of course, this is all speculative on my part. But boy, one of the really striking things about this, Jesse, is that many times when you're searching property like this, you'll have various little holes where you dig for samples. Boy, are they laser focused. They went to one specific location. I think that might go back into this idea of information they had relative to this search warrant. They were very specific in where they went.
Mm-hmm. And that's the question. What evidence did they have? Cathy, very own executive trial producer Cathy Russon, who's in Idaho. You made the trip from Utah over there. As soon as you heard the breaking news, you've been following this case since the very beginning. What are your thoughts on this development, Cathy?
So I have some thoughts on what Terry and Joseph have been talking about. The kids, if these are the kids, they were probably killed in September sometime. And the police executed the first search warrant in January. Well, you got to remember, here, that would have been, I don't know how many feet of snow on his property. So they wouldn't have been able to even dig in January. And now all of a sudden, we're warmed up. So that timing could have something to do with it. They could have uncovered information in that January search from computer searchers or cell phone records or something that gave them an idea. But what Joseph said, they went right to the exact spot. And it is a huge piece of property that he's on. So they definitely had some inside information. But again, that could have came from emails, text messages, something on Chad's part. So at this point, we don't know. When Terry talked about Lori maybe talking, I would always say that that's a great possibility in a situation like this, except for Lori and Chad. They're different. They believe they've been married in multiple lifetimes before this. They believe that they are sealed for all of eternity. Their belief system, I would highly doubt Lori's turning on him.
Different. That's one way to explain it, Cathy. Let's go back to what we heard today during the court appearance. And in response, John Pryor, who's now representing Chad Daybell, he was talking about why there should be a lower bail and how it's wrong to assume at this point that his client may be hit with additional charges. That shouldn't be a justification for a higher bail. Take a listen.
The allegation is that the defendant, Chad Guy Daybell, on or between the 22nd day of September 2019 and the 9th day of June 2020 in the county of Fremont, state of Idaho, did willfully conceal and or aid and abet another to willfully conceal human remains, knowing that said human remains were about to be produced, used and or discovered as evidence in a felony proceeding, inquiry and or investigation authorized by law with the intent to prevent it from being so produced, used and or discovered. Count 2 is also the same charge: destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence, a felony. It's punishable by up to 5 years in the state penitentiary and or up to a $10,000 fine. It alleges that the defendant, Chad Guy Daybell, on or between the 8th day of September 2019 and the 9th day of June 2020 in the county of Fremont, state of Idaho, did willfully destroy, alter, and or conceal human remains, and or did aid and abet another to willfully destroy, alter, and or conceal human remains, knowing that said human remains were about to be produced, used, and or discovered as evidence in a felony proceeding. Inquiry and or investigation authorized by law with the intent to prevent it from being so produced, used, and or discovered. Mr. Daybell, do you understand the allegations on both counts that have been brought against you?
I do.
Mr. Daybell, do you also understand the maximum penalties on each of those counts?
Yes.
Mr. Daybell, do you understand that those maximum penalties could run consecutively, one after the other, or they could run concurrently? Do you understand that?
Yes.
All right, my fault there. I thought it was the defense attorney, but it was actually, you heard from Mr. Daybell himself. Now, Terry, the question is what happens next? Because with the preliminary hearing is set for July 1st, could go into July 2nd. That's a long time away. what are you looking to maybe happen between now and that time?
Well, I can tell you what I hope happens, Jesse. I hope that they find out from the autopsy report that this is, in fact, the remains of the two children. Because if that is the case, then they will be able to increase the charges against both Lori and Chad, for that matter. Because these two charges, as you just heard the judge state, they only carry imprisonment of 5 years, unless, of course, it's not concurrent and it's consecutive. I suppose he could get 10 years. But,
Terry, let
with murder.
Let me just stop you. I have a quick question. Are you not surprised that they weren't initially charged, that he wasn't initially charged with murder, that Lori has not been charged with anything at this point? Because we've seen cases before where people are charged with murder and there's no body. And so the question is, to charge them at this point, you're saying is too early, Lori or Chad?
I do think it's too early. If I recall correctly, in Idaho, there's a 5-year wait before you can declare someone dead. So I think that the authorities are waiting for that time period, unless, of course, you find the remains. And that's what they've done here. And if the autopsy comes back positively, then they will definitely charge both of them, I think, with the murder charge. And then you'll get, whatever the penalty might be for that. I think there is a death penalty here in Idaho.
Right. Cathy, want to go to you, about 30 seconds. What's happening next from where you're at?
Well, I'm going to be hanging out here until Friday. We assume there'll be more press conferences and more information coming out. I'm going to be hanging around Chad Daybell's property. We do expect authorities to speak to the media. Again, they've not announced a time, but I am sure that's coming. The bodies are being transported this afternoon or tonight to the medical examiner's office. So the autopsies wouldn't even start until tomorrow.
Joseph, that means we're going to have you back. Just wait. We're going to see what happens in the next week, 2 weeks. We got a long time between now and that preliminary hearing. So, Joseph, I thank you for coming on. We got bigger conversation. Absolutely. Cathy, stay safe out there. And when we come back, we have a great interview lined up with Lonita Baker, who's actually representing Breonna Taylor's family. We'll be back. And welcome back, everybody. So for anybody who's been following Law&Crime now, or just Law&Crime in general, you know that we've been focusing on the death of Breonna Taylor, that Louisville EMT who was gunned down in her apartment by police. Now, they claim they had a no-knock warrant. They actually claim that they did announce themselves, although that is a matter of dispute, believing that her apartment was a source of drug operations, although there has been no evidence to support that whatsoever. And this is really an interesting and yet tragic case because none of the officers involved have been fired, and none of them have been criminally charged. I'm joined right now by Lonita Baker, who actually represents Breonna Taylor's family. Lonita, thank you so much for coming here on Law&Crime.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with some recent developments and get your perspective. So we know with termination that Mayor Greg Fisher has said that the officers can't be fired because they're in the middle of an investigation that would violate their due process. Now, you have disagreed with that. My question is, do you think that this is just their interpretation of the law, or do you think something else is going on here about why these officers haven't been fired yet?
I think that it's an issue that the mayor has been advised by legal counsel. But as I've said before, while the attorneys have advised that, it's not that the mayor cannot. There's nothing prohibiting the mayor from not firing the officers. If terminated, they would have a right to appeal the decision, which will go before a full investigative board as well. But I think that there's sufficient cause to terminate the officers involved, not only the three responsible for the death of Breonna Taylor on that night, but also now, as we know, Joshua James, who swore out the search warrant for the officers. There's always a risk of litigation when you terminate someone.
Yeah, and look, there are people who look at this and think that this is a cover-up and that there has been a lack of transparency. And I guess the question is, the Louisville Police Department, they just released this incident report of the night in question. And by all accounts, it's pretty bare bones. There's not a lot to it. There's a lot of redactions. In fact, they said the injuries sustained by Taylor were none. That's what they listed, none. So, I mean, again, when people think this, what's your perspective on this incident report?
I saw the incident this afternoon, just like you guys, and with the public. And it is, how can you say that a woman who was shot 8 times suffered no injuries? It's beyond me. You know, as we said, we know that there was lies in the search warrant. There's no body camera that's been turned over, although we do have reason to believe that there was at least an officer there that did have body camera. So why are they withholding that? So.
Well, I guess the question is, what is Breonna Taylor's family hoping for here? Not just these officers to be fired, but my understanding is for them to be charged. And the question is, what are they hoping that these officers are charged with?
Mm-hmm. At a minimum, we know that we have fraud on the warrant, and there's a case for manslaughter or murder for the officers who recklessly fired into the home. We know that bullets did not just enter Breonna's home. Bullets also entered several neighborhoods' homes. We know that they've lied about that night, saying that they announced themselves, but we are up to 12 neighbors who say, you know, we were there, we would have heard if officers announced themselves. We've also called 911. We've heard Kenny's 911 call where you hear nothing in the background. They did not announce themselves. So at a minimum, those are lies as well. So you have a number of things they can be charged with. We just want the mayor and
the argument. The argument that I guess they could put forward, no matter what the charges, is, hey, listen, this was just a tragic mistake. We thought mistakenly that there was something illegal going on. We tried to get a warrant. We did what we thought we had to do, and ultimately, this was just a tragic mistake. And what would your response be to that argument? Because is that why we may see a delay? Why it might not be so easy to charge these officers as it was or as it is in the George Floyd case?
Lying on a search warrant is not a mistake. So from the very beginning, when you brought Breonna Taylor into this case, that is not a mistake. You lied on the search warrant, but for saying that the postal inspector confirmed that suspicious packages were going to Breonna's apartment, which we know the postal inspector denied giving that information. In fact, the postal inspector said the agency that checked with us, we told them there was no suspicious activity with this address. So that very lie is what started the chain of events that led to Breonna's death. That is not a mistake. To go in and not announce yourself. But for that information, there would not have been probable cause. The judge would not have signed off on a warrant with it. There was no probable cause outside of that lie. So that's not a mistake. And we can't let them get off saying, hey, this is a mistake. That's reckless behavior. And our police department has no room for that type of reckless behavior.
Lonita, it's my understanding the family has filed a lawsuit that this will be an incredibly difficult time for them. How are they doing at this point?
Well, one, the support of the country. There's a lot of support that's rallied around them. They are very appreciative of that, and that has helped. In general, you know, they have their good days, their bad days. Breonna was such a beautiful person to be around. They said she was really kind of the glue that held the family together. So it's just learning to get by without her. But they want to ensure that her death is not in vain. So, you know, tomorrow we have before Metro Council, the full council will be voting on Breonna's law, which will ban no-knock warrants. So things like that, they want to make sure that this doesn't happen to any other family.
And we've been seeing changes across the country as there's these instances that keep on happening. Lonita, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it, and we are sending our best to Breonna Taylor's family. We are going to switch gears right now, and we're going to focus on another police-involved shooting, and that, of course, is George Floyd. As you know, all officers involved there have been arrested and charged in connection with his death. And what we learned, and I want to turn to this right now, is attorney Earl Gray. He represents Thomas Lane, and Thomas Lane is one of the officers who was actually holding down George Floyd's legs. Now, he did say, Lane, and according to the criminal complaint, he asked Chauvin whether or not Floyd should be turned over. Well, he made an appearance. This attorney made an appearance on CNN with Chris Cuomo. Listen to this defense.
If all of these people say, why didn't my client intercede? Well, if the public is there and they're so in an uproar about this, they didn't intercede either. And my client's down where he can't really see.
Hold on, Counselor, hold on.
Yes,
Two things. One,
yes.
You're laying on a man's legs. You've got a fine view of what's going on with that man. The other officer is literally a foot in front of you on his neck. Two, I understand that he has a senior officer telling him what to do, but there's also a duty to intervene. And if you think an officer is doing something that's dangerous to a civilian, you have a duty to intervene. And he did not intervene. And the idea that the civilians should have rushed in to a policing situation in the inner city of Minneapolis against 4 police officers that have weapons and are kneeling on the neck of a man, don't you think that's asking a little much of civilians and a little too little of your client?
Absolutely. I just brought that up.
I just brought that up. I'm here with the trial attorney, Catherine Smith. I also have with me Terry Austin. Catherine, I just brought that up. I mean, what do you make of that defense?
Man, that's tough. It pains me to see it because obviously it's not even comparable. People keep forgetting that police officers are trained and they're being paid. They have an affirmative duty to intervene. You can't sit by and watch someone be murdered and let it go on.
Yeah, I guess, Terry, we understand we live in an age of media and lawyers. It's important for them to get in front of this. What purpose did this serve? And does it give you any indication about a possible defense from Mr. Lane?
Jesse, you know, I'm not only an attorney, but I taught public relations, have a master's degree in journalism. This lawyer needs to stop getting in front of the camera. You cannot talk on an interview and say, well, let me throw it out. And then have Chris Como, who is an excellent journalist, by the way, say, well, no, that's not really a, good position. And your client had a duty to intervene. And then have the attorney say, oh, yeah, you're right. Terrible interview. He needs to practice law. Hopefully his legal skills are better than his PR skills.
Well, especially considering on the video, bystanders did try to intervene, but Tou Thao and Derek Chauvin prevented that from happening. Everybody who saw the video, everybody saw that happening. Talking about other things that we're learning in the course of this, Derek Chauvin, again, the man who pressed his knee or allegedly pressed his knee on the back of George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes, we are learning more details about perhaps the prior relationship between Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, that they worked at the same nightclub. Listen to this interview that was conducted by CBS.
What kind of history?
They bumped heads.
How?
It has a lot to do with Derek being extremely aggressive within the club with some of the patrons, which was an issue.
The Floyd family says it believes what happened on May 25th was in part personal. Is there any doubt in your mind that Derek Chauvin knew George Floyd?
No, he knew him.
Catherine, that's huge. This is from a co-worker. Does that change your understanding, or might change the charges that Derek Chauvin faces?
Absolutely. I mean, if there's a pre-existing relationship, one that was built on animus, then that really changes the level of mens rea or thought that goes into this murder. So that could be upped easily to first-degree murder if this was an intentional killing.
Terry, let me ask you this, and this is a difficult one. People look at this killing and they see it as a racially motivated crime, which it may very well be. But if there's some other motive put forward through the evidence that these two had a prior relationship and he actually killed them because of that, what happens then?
Well, I think it could be both issues, Jesse. I think he could have had animus against Floyd because he just didn't like him as a person. They both worked at this nightclub and they didn't like each other. And there's some evidence to that. And you showed part of that clip. But it could also be that Chauvin didn't like Floyd because he didn't want a black man telling him what to do. So I see those two motives commingling, so to speak. And I think that if the evidence does show that, this really could very well be a crime motivated by hate and by race.
Yeah, especially, again, if they have a prior relationship, that first-degree murder charge may be looking a little stronger. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll have more. And welcome back, everybody. You know, we talk a lot about police-involved killings lately. We talk about George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Javier Ambler, which is actually something that our Live PD family has been following and something that we plan to talk about more on Friday. But right now, Maurice Gordon, this is out of New Jersey, and this is a man who was gunned down by a state trooper during a traffic stop. And it's a very interesting case because a lot of it is captured on video and audio that has been released, and apparently he was gunned down during a struggle between him and this officer. Now, I want to take a look at one of these videos, and we're going to break it down on the other side.
Yeah. You want a mask like this to wear? Yes? Yeah. You want a mask? Did you have one in your car or not? I'm going to put it in the bugs out of here. Get the car. Get the fucking car. Get the fucking car. Get the car now. Get the car. One time, give me another unit now. Get out of the car. Get the fuck out of the car. Get out of the car now. Get the fuck out. Get out of the car. Get out of the fucking car now. Get the fuck out. Get the fuck out. Get the fuck out. One call, get me another unit. One call, get me another unit. Get the fuck out. Get the fuck out. Shot fired! Shot fired! Shot fired!
Okay, so Randall Wetzel, who's the officer there, he's currently on paid leave. He has not been charged. There's currently an investigation underway. Catherine, let's start, because this is an interesting one. On one hand, Maurice Gordon was unarmed. That's by all accounts. On the other hand, he was told to stay in the patrol car. He was even allowed to be in the patrol car, and yet he got out. Don't know why. And there seemed to be a struggle that ensued. Is it proper to charge Wetzel here? And if so, what should he be charged with?
I do think that this is slightly more complicated than the other egregious examples we've seen recently because there's just more at play. But to take it back a step, he was never under arrest. And that's the thing. To order him back into the car when he was never formally under arrest, I think was the wrong move to begin with. Obviously, something accelerated and went out of control. And I think from some of the videos that we saw from the victim's earlier behavior, there might have been some EDP or emotionally disturbed person issues, wherein the officer should have immediately called from some sort of intervention or backup if he saw those signs. So I don't think it should have escalated to where it did. But is it appropriate for criminal charges? I just don't know.
Okay, Terry, and you just heard Catherine. She made a good point about the mindset of Maurice Gordon, because we know that there were other audio recordings, including a 911 call, where there was a friend of Gordon who actually said he was concerned about his well-being. He was acting a little weird. Does that play into this analysis at all? I mean, what's your perspective on that?
I think people are going to begin to stop calling 911 when the end result is the fact that individuals are killed. He was stopped for speeding. People are stopped for speeding all the time. And the police officer, either from the 911 call or from his observations of the behavior of Gordon, he should have realized that, you know, to Catherine's point, it should have been de-escalated instead of escalated. And you should not have to worry. I actually do believe some charges should be brought, because so what if he runs away? It's a speeding ticket. Let him go. There was no weapon to speak of. And why was he in the car? I heard one report, and I don't know if
Terry,
this
does
is
it change your perspective that he actually consented to being searched?
Well, I do think that that is a factor, that he consented to being searched. But there was a report that he sat in the car for 45 minutes. So maybe he changed his mind and decided to get out of the car. So, it is, I agree 100%. It's a complicated case. It's not straightforward. But my final thought here on this issue is you should not have to die because you're speeding.
That's 100% right. And you shouldn't have to die if you were passing around a $20 counterfeit bill, like in the George Floyd case, allegedly. Let's turn on to something that might be a little bit more straightforward, maybe not. NYPD. Now, you may have seen the video of this. There's an NYPD officer. His name is Vincent D'Andrea, and he has now been charged with several crimes, including third-degree assault, for allegedly violently shoving a protester to the ground during, ironically, a police brutality protest. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so Catherine, I want to start with you here. First, the union president, the president of the Police Benevolent Association, he said, once again, Mayor Bill de Blasio and the NYPD brass are sacrificing cops to save their own skin, clearly disagreeing with him, Vincent D'Andrea, being charged. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't think that there's any question that what he did was completely inappropriate. And under any other standard, it would be assault. It's interesting because I had a case very similar to this that went to trial. We were suing the police for using excessive force in an almost identical scenario with a protester at an Occupy Wall Street protest. And what's interesting is the cops even prevailed in that civil case because they were claiming there were all sorts of concerns ancillary to the protest where they were afraid for their security and they needed to use force to clear out the area, and they were using this extra caution to make sure that the police were going to be safe. I expect that that's what we're going to hear. And that, in my opinion, is not a valid excuse to get out of criminal liability or, frankly, civil liability.
Catherine, we're talking about the NYPD. Is it tougher to prosecute and secure a conviction against an NYPD officer than perhaps another department?
Absolutely, 100%. In part because there is this common sense argument. The NYPD is ostensibly supposed to be out there protecting us and helping us. So they are entitled more flexibility to use force to secure our safety. But on the other hand, there are people who truly believe that because they're cops, they should be held to a different standard, which frankly, in terms of criminal liability, is just not the case.
And I'll tell you, at the very least, so many of these incidents are being caught on tape. We're seeing actions from both sides during the course of these protests, and we live in 2020 where all of it is captured, and we can see all of it. And in a court of law, that's sometimes the strongest evidence. Terry Austin, Catherine Smith, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. And everyone out there, thanks for joining us. Come back on Friday. We're going to be reporting about the top stories. In the meantime, stay safe. We'll see you then.